Welcome to part 2 of the Dead Sea section of our Israel series. This place right here and the people group that lived here are probably way more important to your faith than you even realize. And while they don't have necessary ties to early Christianity or to even what we do nowadays in our religion, they do have a huge part in showing us the authenticity of what is actually going on in Christianity, and that is massive. So where are we? Well, right now we're on the most northwestern side of the Dead Sea in an area called Qumran, and this place specifically housed a people group called the Essenes. Now, you might have heard of that name before, and that's because it's a sect of Judaism during the time of Jesus. You might have heard of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots, and this is another sect of Judaism here in Israel. There was a lot of them during the time of Jesus, but those are the really four main ones that kind of stood out above the rest. The Essenes overall had a very particular way of going about life. For example, their ritual bathing. This was a thing that they would do all the time, even more so than maybe some of the other Jews in major cities like Jerusalem nearby. This was very specific to them because of the work that they did here as scribes and different ways that they operated as a community. Now, speaking of community, overall, the community aspect of the Essenes was huge. They shared everything. They were all one big family. And of course, this was a major operation here in Qumran where all the Essenes were together. And what are you going to do? You're not going to go off by yourself into the desert and go find your own stuff or hide your own stuff. Of course, you need to stick together in order to survive here, period. But getting to the most important piece of who the Essenes were is that they were scribes. They wrote down the books of the Bible. And this is massive for us. How do we know that they're scribes? Well, because we found their work. And this is probably one of the most important things that has ever been found for the Christian faith and for the Jewish faith. As you walk around Qumran, you can see several different rooms where people would have slept. You also see scribe rooms, and especially you'll see mikvah as well. These are the ritual cleansing baths that they would use in order to go cleanse themselves, go write some more scripture, go cleanse themselves, go write some more scripture. This is a very important kind of practice that they did over and over and over again. You may have also heard that there's a possibility that the Essenes have a connection to John the Baptist or to even Jesus. Now, we don't really know anything, and there's no evidence to prove this at all. However, John was kind of a nomad in the desert, right? He had this wild hair and he ate bugs, and he was just a different kind of guy. Part of that could be coming from the Essene lifestyle, or it could be showing that some of the beliefs that he has came from the Essenes, or at least were inspired by it, right? And so that's what some people argue, although we have no evidence for that whatsoever. It does seem kind of like John to be in a community like this, though, at least maybe for a little while. You see, the thing that really makes this place extra special is that the Essenes weren't just scribes of random things, but they were scribes of the Holy Scriptures. And of course, that means the Old Testament. So in the 40s, there was actually a shepherd boy that was walking right here near this cave. And as he was walking, he threw rocks into some caves nearby. And when he threw a rock into this cave, he heard something shatter. That was a tell, obviously, that he needed to check it out, and he did. And he found dozens of scrolls, ancient scrolls that were in pottery, and that was the shattering sound that he heard. So pretty quickly, archaeologists and other professionals came out here to see exactly what was happening. And of course, they look through all the scrolls, and they see that these scrolls are all the books of the Old Testament except for Esther, at least pieces of them. Some of them are fragments, some of them are really almost entirely intact. For example, the Isaiah scroll, known as the Great Isaiah scroll, because it is the most intact version of this scroll that we have ever found. And keep in mind, the Essenes were here over 2,000 years ago, and these scrolls were dated back to the time before Jesus. Now, having all these fragments of these scriptures is important enough, and it's really amazing, but to have the Great Isaiah scroll, it just blows us out of the water for Christianity. Let me read you this excerpt from Isaiah 53.
Isaiah 53 is part of the Old Testament, but this specific chapter is a messianic chapter. That means that it's talking about Jesus. And I don't even have to tell you that in order for you to understand this once I read through this section here. Starting in verse 5, it says, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and by his wounds we are healed." There are so many points in this chapter that point directly to Christ without a doubt. Even when Jewish people are shown this scripture today, they accuse Christians of changing the scripture after the fact later on in more modern history. But these scrolls being found here before the time of Christ, before any of that happened, before he died on the cross, before he lived in Israel, all of it, this shows us the authenticity of the scripture. It changes everything for us.
So just take a second and think about how amazing both this cave and this community of Essenes are. God used the last 2,000 years to house scripture for us right here. And just a little under 100 years ago, they were found. And that's within our time, right? Like, that's in our time frame, our generations here, learning more and more about the authenticity of scripture to bring more and more people to him. I love that he did this during my time. These are the type of things that oftentimes I find myself looking for authenticity and ways to verify certain scriptures, right? I want to be able to stand on a firm foundation, and that's what God has provided for us. We don't need this evidence, but it does certainly show us something. And so I love Qumran for that one fact. If you've enjoyed this video and you've learned something about the Essenes or the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'd love for you to leave a comment down below and let me know about it. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.